Good morning. I'm Lucille LePage, this morning's worship associate, with just a few announcements for you before the service begins. First of all, a warm welcome to everyone this morning, to those of you who are here in person and to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Everyone is welcome here. Whatever your heritage, your age, your income, your abilities, and whatever your religious beliefs. And also, however you choose to participate, whether in person or on YouTube. And as a welcoming congregation, we affirm the full inclusion of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. A very special welcome to any visitors with us this morning. If you'd like to get connected and learn more about our church community life, please take a moment to fill out a yellow pew card, which is located on the back of the seat in front of you, or sign the guest book in the vestibule. We hope you'll join us for refreshments, actually lunch today, downstairs in our fellowship hall, following the service so that we have a chance to connect with you in person. Our child care staff person, Kiana Dubose, is here with us this morning, and so elementary-aged children are warmly invited to join Kiana downstairs in our fellowship hall for crafts, stories, and games. Before we begin, if folks watching from home would like to light a candle or chalice along with us here after the service begins, please go and get one now so that we can do this ritual together in spirit. A few other announcements. We're serving lunch today, as I mentioned, after the service downstairs in the fellowship hall. Just follow the crowd down the stairs, and we do hope you'll join us. Our chef, Heidi, whose delicious food we enjoyed last year, is returning once a month for the time being. So that's a very happy thing. There's plenty to go around, so don't hesitate to join us. Tomorrow is the Meeting House Foundation's annual Martin Luther King Day observance. As always, they are presenting a rich and varied program, including a keynote talk by Renee Graham of the Boston Globe and music by Gordon Michaels. This all gets underway tomorrow at 2 p.m. right here in the sanctuary. The next meeting of the book discussion group is coming up this week on Wednesday, January 17th at 1 p.m. in the Williams Room, ground floor, near the back of toward the back of the building. The book book chosen this time is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. It's fiction, it's a great story. Everyone is welcome. Wednesday at 1 p.m. downstairs. And if you haven't had a chance yet, please check out Kathleen Williams' exhibit of her photography and poetry in the entry house. Kathleen has provided small chapbooks of her poetry for sale as well. It really is a beautiful exhibit. Finally, Eleanor Melvin, our wonderful tech specialist who streams the services for us each week, will be taking orders.
It's actually Florence.
Oh, I'm sorry. Florence. So sorry. Florence Melvin will be taking orders. Thanks for the correction. Taking orders for Girl Scout cookies. And she will be downstairs in the fellowship hall for a little while after the service today. She can only accept cash and not checks, but she can probably give you ways to contact her if you're not prepared with cash today. And that is all the announcements, so thank you.
Feel free to sing along. This is a vocal piece.
Sweet low, sweet cherry.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. Thank you so much. This, they cooked this up just this morning, so that was just really a lot of fun to do something so spontaneously. It was great. So welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here this morning. It's wonderful to have a calm, sunny day after what we've been going through lately. And I had a moment of gratitude yesterday. I had to come over here in the afternoon and had to get rerouted on closed streets, and I was seeing the flooding and all the damage around, and I got up to Prospect Street and turned the corner onto Church, and there was the church, completely steady and stable, and the bell tower rising as always, and boy, it was a beautiful sight. So just wanted to share that. It means a lot, really. And I think gratitude to the Meeting House Foundation for making sure that the bell tower stays where we want it. I don't take this for granted. So I wanted to put a few things in your minds right now. As we've come out of the holidays, we're kind of entering a period of church life where we start to focus more on issues of justice and get a little more active in the outside world. And I wanted to share that the UUA has a program that it calls 30 Days of Love. And that begins tomorrow. It runs from Martin Luther King's birthday through Valentine's Day. And I will be putting some information in the weekly email about that so that you can find out and maybe participate. What they do is they have a weekly theme for justice issues and love, and it includes some spiritual practices, some suggestions for how people can get engaged. And I encourage you to check it out. And all that got me to thinking that General Assembly is coming up in June, and that it's entirely virtual this year. And this would be a great year for folks from the church to try out General Assembly, register for it, try some workshops. So you'll be hearing more about that this spring as well. We also have the big vote on the new language for Article 2 to replace our 7 principles. So this is, it's kind of an important time, and I want folks to know what's happening. And then finally, the UUA is also getting ready to launch its program that they call UU the Vote, which they do every election cycle. They have an organized program for encouraging people to help with registration efforts, get out the vote efforts, and there'll be a lot of information about that too if you're looking for a way to get involved in helping with the election that's coming up this year. And not just wanting to put your head under the covers the way I do, but anyway, we have a lot to be concerned about this year, and hopefully motivation to get involved and do what we can to help. So that's just a taste of what's happening in the denomination that I did want to share with you. And as I said, I'll be giving out more information as time goes on. And with that, let us deepen our hearts and our spirits for worship. Our words this morning are by Nelson Mandela. The time for healing of the wounds has come. The time to build is upon us. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. There is no easy road to freedom. None of us acting alone can achieve success. We must therefore act as a united people for reconciliation, for nation building, for the birth of a new world. Come, let us worship together. Our opening hymn this morning is number 95 in your gray hymnal, There Is More Love Somewhere. In the Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we enter into worship by the simple ritual of kindling our chalice. The flame lights our way forward into the future, while the chalice itself reminds us that we are rooted and embraced by community. As Lucille lights our chalice, if you have a candle or a chalice prepared for us at home, please light it with us now. We take a moment now to affirm the covenant that we share with one another. Newcomers and guests, the words of the affirmation are printed in your order of service. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. Please be seated. And each week we light a candle to offer our hopes for peace throughout the world. And once again, the news is not good this week as we are seeing signs that the conflict in the Middle East is spreading, expanding, and creating more chaos and instability. And conditions in Gaza continue to worsen as well and become even more inhumane. And so let us dedicate ourselves to finding ways to embody peace, and to work for peace. So I have a story for you about Dr. Martin Luther King that I just was struck by because it just showed him as a dad and TV viewer. And, you know, we so often treat him as an icon and not as just a real flesh and blood human being. So it seems that the original Star Trek series that was launched back in 1966 starred, as you may remember, a black woman named Nichelle. Why am I losing her last name? Somebody probably knows. And she played Lieutenant Uruhu in the original Star Trek. And they had a first season, and she decided to quit. And she went to Gene Roddenberry, who was the creator of the series, and told him she'd gotten an offer to be on Broadway, and she was going to leave. And he tried to talk her out of it, and he said, well, don't decide right yet. Give us a week let's think about this. So that weekend there was an event or fundraiser that she went to, and somebody came up to her and said, there's somebody here who's dying to meet you. He's your biggest fan. And she said, all right. And she went, and sure enough, it was Martin Luther King. And so she was talking to him, and he was praising her and her work, and he told her that Star Trek was the only TV show that he would let his kids stay up late to watch. And that the reason he did that was because here was this beautiful black woman in her role as a leader on the show. And she told him that she was planning to leave. And he said to her, you can't leave. It is so important that you are on this program. You are showing everybody that it doesn't matter, that a black woman can be in this role of leadership and you know, be beautiful and intelligent and be acting in this way. And you're the only person on TV who is showing people this. So she stayed. The show didn't last that long, but she decided to stay with it. And Gene Roddenberry told this story many years later, and he said that it wasn't a stretch at all for him to cast a black woman in this kind of a role in 1966, because he said, you know, we're portraying the 23rd century, and surely by the 23rd century, we will have outgrown prejudice and intolerance, and that it won't matter who's in what position. So we're closer to that than we were. Let's hope for continued progress. Thanks for listening.
You're invited now to join in the responsive reading, which is printed in your order of service. This is an excerpt by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. from an address that he gave to the 10th Annual Southern Christian Leadership Foundation in 1967, August 1967. This week, we ask you to begin the reading. Please read the bold-faced portions, and you will start, and we'll alternate the phrases.
This is where we are.
Where do we go from here? We must stand up amidst a system that still oppresses us and develop an unassailable and majestic sense of values.
What is needed is the realization that power without love is regardless and abusive.
And that love without power is sentimental and anemic. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love.
And this is what we must see as we move on.
Nichelle Nichols. My apologies for forgetting her last name. I invite us now into a time of prayer to be followed by silent meditation. And before we begin, please open your gray hymnals to number 88, Calm Soul of All Things, which is our meditation response of the month. We'll go directly from silence into song, and we'll stay seated. Spirit of love, source of all life, we are here this morning with our imperfect, limited words, with our thoughts too deep for words, with our yearning for wholeness, for connection, and for love. And along with our deepest desires, we bring our worries and our fears. Yesterday and in recent days, we once again were battered by dangerous winds and flooding tides. And we ask ourselves what this means for our future. Will this be our new normal? We struggle to have the courage to imagine. Today we give thanks for the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, for his courage, his vision, and his brilliance. We honor his legacy, and we ask that we continue to heed the new prophetic voices that emerge, that offer us visions for a more loving and just future, and that urge us to step out beyond our own comfort to help bring this future to life. We ask for solace this morning for all those who need it, all those who are grieving or ill or alone, and all those in need of our loving thoughts. All this we ask in your name, which is love, as we enter into silence. Amen. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Beyond Vietnam by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He wrote, "This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality an all-embracing and unconditional love for all humankind. This oft misunderstood, oft misinterpreted concept, so readily dismissed by the Nietzsches of the world as a weak and cowardly force, has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm not speaking of that force which is just emotional bosh. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, for love is God. And everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us." He concluded, "Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day."
At this time in our service, we pause to receive an offering. This is a time for us to engage in the spiritual practice of generosity, as each shares what they can with the community. We learn in gathering in religious community that together we're able to do so much more than we can do alone. We share our gifts with gratitude for our lives, for this community, and for all the relationships and the ties that bind us. This morning's offering will now be gratefully received. Blessings on the givers and upon your gifts.
wasn't until the election of 2016 that I fully came to understand the depth of the derision and the dislike that conservative sectors of our country, actually not really conservative, but reactionaries, what they feel for liberals. I'm not exactly sure how I was able to insulate myself to such an extent until then. I mean, was I blocking my eyes and ears with bubble wrap? I don't know. And perhaps the messages weren't quite so overt in past years. But I remember well the first time I heard people like myself being referred to as snowflakes, fragile, easily destroyed, ephemeral, here one second and gone the next. And I spluttered in protest. That is certainly not true. I can face reality. I can confront hard truths. I don't melt. But over time, I came to understand that the more reactionary among us have a very limited view of what power is and what we mean by power. And because they gravitate toward displays of force, such as carrying powerful weapons, they are likely only to understand power as force, or intimidation, or coercion. And they interpret other ways of acting as weak in comparison. And we have a name for that sort of power. We call it power over. It's a wish to impose one's will on others and a belief that some should be able to make decisions for others and to control others. Power over. The examples throughout our history are many. Enslavement, for starters, when some people literally own the bodies of other people. And other examples, forcing native people to give up their ancestral lands, to move onto reservations. And all throughout our history down to the present day, denying whole groups of citizens the right to vote, decreeing where they could sit on a bus, denying many people the right to marry, refusing to allow women the right to manage their own reproductive health. And this is the kind of power that Dr. Martin Luther King was talking about when he talked about power without love. And despite the lofty words of our founding documents, our country's history is full of people exercising power without love, and they continue to do so. Now, how about the liberals? It has been said that liberals are likely to try to avoid power. Instead, uncomfortable with the idea of exerting power over others, they might try to seek influence. And if people who try to reject power altogether are not careful, they can end up caring but powerless and offering love without power. Dr. King was cautioning liberals about this, as we heard in our reading earlier. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power without love, or love without power. But do we have to seek just one or the other? Are those the only two ways to live in the world? Fortunately not. We can choose, and Americans have chosen since 1789 a different form of power known as power with, shared power. The work of liberal governments is to create power, but not for itself. A liberal government's role is to increase power for society and to share it, rather than to control it and limit it to a small group of people. Paul Starr, the author of the book Freedom's Power, The True Force of Liberalism, observes that a liberal government imposes limits on power even as its goal is to spread it further. And we do see this reflected throughout our system of government in the language of the Constitution, the foundation of the rule of law, the checks and balances that we establish by creating 3 equal branches of government. Paul Starr calls this disciplined power. And perhaps decentralized power is a good description as well as this: freedom and liberty with responsibility. But regardless of what we name it, this form of power, power with, has a foundation in respect and compassion for the citizens, compassion and respect born of the love of people. It reflects a trust in people, in each other, and a belief that people can exercise power well. Ultimately, we see this in the language of the Declaration of Independence, that people are given the rights of liberty and the opportunity to flourish. Now, as I have mentioned in the past, the use of the word happiness, the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, was not defined as we would define it today, happiness as an emotion associated with pleasure, but rather happiness was meant as the opportunity to flourish. To be able to flourish was to be happy. The role of government, as the founders saw it, was to create a framework to enable flourishing. They created a form of government that both limited its own power and sought to disperse it. So compared to a military dictatorship, some would see this as weak. It can be very hard for some people to feel the sense of trust necessary to allow a liberal democracy to work well. And trust, of course, is born out of love, out of a desire to understand and to feel compassion for one another. If we see each other as fully human and as an equal part of the society that we share, then we can trust more readily. A government that is not trusting is one that doesn't see people as equal and part of the whole. A government not founded on trust is one that will try to control power. We here in the United States have been struggling to balance these 2 visions since our founding. And perhaps looking at the history of voting rights offers the best example of this tension. At the very beginning, of course, only male property owners had the right to vote. And in this country, democracy and the impact of the popular vote was limited, and of course is still limited, by the Electoral College. So those in power still do have their thumb on the scale. They can still exercise control over electoral outcomes through the Electoral College. But from our earliest years, states began to remove the requirements that people own property in order to vote. And then, ultimately, Black men, theoretically, were granted the right to vote. Women joined the ranks in 1920. And later on, direct election of United States senators was finally established. However, there has always been constant tension between conservatives and liberals. And if you read a timeline of the expansion of voting rights, it feels like you're watching a dance. One state will abolish a poll tax. Another state will reinstate it. One state might allow women to vote, but then take it back a year or 2 later. Native Americans and Chinese Americans were finally enfranchised in the mid-20th century. But at the very same time, literacy tests imposed in the southern states completely undermined the efforts of Black citizens to vote. Back and forth it went, and it continues to go. In the last election, there were multiple stories of polling places being closed, Polling places moved to out-of-the-way areas that were inaccessible for people without cars, or polling places having sharply curtailed hours. And so it goes, back and forth, between those trying to hoard power and those who believe that it should be spread more widely. Those who would claim power for a small group claim that they are trying to protect the integrity of the voting process and prevent voter fraud. And so we see once again that effort to sow mistrust and to insist on seeing large groups of people as other, as not deserving, and not to be trusted. We see once again power without love. Last spring, journalist and podcast host Ezra Klein interviewed Harvard scholar Danielle Allen. And as a mixed-race woman, she embodies much of the tension herself that is present in our society around rights and privileges. Her parents were married before it was legal for them to do so. Danielle Allen advocates for what she calls power-sharing liberalism, meaning extending more rights and opening up access to power for more and more people. She told Ezra Klein, "Power-sharing liberalism is really the goal to build in the 21st century a version of a rights-protecting constitutional democracy where power is genuinely shared throughout organizations." Professor Allen wants to see more equality of participation and what she calls co-ownership of our public spaces and our public life. She wants to have more people gain access to decision-making so that they can flourish. And Professor Allen noted something that I found surprising. She cited Massachusetts as an example of a state where voting is, as she put it, mal-distributed. She says that voting patterns are heavily skewed toward property owners in Massachusetts and that renters are much less likely to vote. One of the ways that Allen is proposing encouraging more participation among renters is to institute same-day voting in Massachusetts, meaning you can show up to the polls and register and vote. She argues that renters are a much more transient population and move much more frequently than homeowners do, and so they are unlikely to keep registering to vote whenever they move, which they, of course, have to do way in advance of the election day. So if they were allowed to register at the same time they went to vote, she believes that more renters, people who have different concerns often than property owners, will be able to fully participate and therefore help influence state policy. Their voices would finally be heard in proportion to their numbers. So here we see this willingness to trust, to hand power out to a bigger group, to believe that people will do the right thing when given the chance. And so there is an offer of power with love. The stakes of this struggle between the two visions of power feel very high these days. Danielle Allen noted that there is a political theory that over time, every human organizational form has tended toward oligarchy, or as she put it, toward capture. Professor Allen posits that the work of democracy is to continuously resist capture. And she says, there is no end of history. There is no state of rest for democracy. Democracy is the work of resisting capture by powerful interests and restoring power sharing just over and over and over again. And I was fascinated by this statement because I am someone who in her heart of hearts believes that the progress of love and justice should unfold in a straight line. And I am frustrated by the dance that I mentioned earlier, the one step forward, one step backward nature of trying to not just expand democracy, but even to preserve it at all. My friends, we are in those months of the year when we take a close look at topics such as love and justice. Dr. Martin Luther King spoke frequently about love and justice and power, and he spoke forcefully about the need for a form of love that could translate into power and at the same time continue to maintain its goal of justice and human flourishing. Too often, we have watched others wield the kind of power that makes us uncomfortable, the kind where love and compassion is not present, and we cannot see ourselves. We don't want to do that. So we can't see a role for ourselves in seeking power. And in return, we are labeled snowflakes. But Dr. King and others have offered us a way forward, a middle way of embracing the kind of power that is born out of love and that seeks to foster the growth and participation of more and more people. We can find that power, usually by finding other people committed to it as well, and joining forces. It has been done before, and it will need to be done again, over and over and over again. And my friends, there is yet another name for this kind of power, this power with, this disciplined power. Its other name is beloved community, in which we are all welcomed, all invited to participate and to share. May we all continue to strive to bring forth this kind of power, to bring forth the beloved community, and to commit to sustain it. Blessed be. Amen. I invite us now to say together the unison prayer that is printed in your order of service. It's called "We Are Made for the Stars" by Dr. Martin Luther King. Eternal God, help us to love Thee with all of our hearts, souls, and minds, and our neighbors as ourselves. And help us to realize that we have a moral responsibility to be good and conscientious, but also to be intelligent. And grant that we will always reach out for that which is high, realizing that we are made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity. Amen. And to close this morning, we'll sing Dr. King's favorite hymn, number 199 in your gray hymnal, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." Dr. King leaves us with these words this morning. The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? Amen. Song of Parting. Blow them out as we say the words here to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go in peace, return in love. Amen.